We have 12 drivers entering their hot seat year next year in 2024 in Formula One, and one of them is currently on the hot seat. So we're going to talk a little bit about the 2024 driver market. Jeremiah, who's your number one guy on the hot seat for next year?
Fernando Alonso. I got to know where he ends up, man. I got to know.
Then we'll talk him first.
Welcome to Turn 1, a Formula One podcast. Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Welcome back to another episode of Turn 1 Podcast. We're your hosts, Jeremiah
and Thomas.
Like we mentioned earlier, driver markets. 12 drivers are going to be in the hot seat for next year, with Logan Sargent being the only one that's in the hot seat for this year. So we're just going to bypass that little fact right there and go ahead and move into next year. We're going to talk about what we need to see from some of these drivers if they're going to be able to either keep their seat or move to a better team. And we're going to talk about realistically, where they could go, because there's 12 drivers. The contract is up. That's the entire grid just doing a big shake. I love it.
12 drivers up next year, and obviously Sargent, there's not a guarantee that he resigns next year, so that seat could be, up for grabs for next year as well. But let's start with your biggest move that you think could potentially happen, which is Fernando Alonso, currently with the Aston Martin team. Obviously, a lot of question marks around how Aston Martin is run, right? Because you have the Lawrence Stroll aspect. There's actually no real definitive details on Lance Stroll's contract because it's, daddy's team.
Right.
But with Alonso, we know it's up in 2024. And would your biggest question there be, is he going to retire after next season or go somewhere else?
Not a chance. He goes somewhere else for sure. There's no way I guess he could go back to Aston Martin, but we have to see more from the Aston Martin team in terms of their car production for next year. If they're going to have a better team and they're going to be competing and staying competing at the top like they did at the beginning of the year this year, then I could see Fernando Alonso staying there. However, let me tell you what I would like to see, because it's probably not going to happen, but it'd be cool if it happened. Who else's contract is up in 2024? Sergio Perez. So I would like to see a pairing of Max Verstappen and Fernando Alonso at Red Bull. Like I said, probably not going to happen, but that would be sweet.
I do like Fernando Alonso. I'm not fully on the train like you are. The only thing I would think about him going to Red Bull, why? Because Sergio's getting you enough points as is now to clinch the drivers every single year. Why replace one for another? Like, it's not an up-and-comer that's going to get you a championship down the line. They're still obviously going to have Max winning the championships. What's the reasoning that they would look to bring in Alonso?
Well, for starters, I have to cut you off whenever you say Sergio Perez and Fernando Alonso is a one for another trade, because that's not the case at all. Because first of all, Red Bull wants to guarantee the 1-2 in the driver standings. And can you honestly say right now, guarantee Sergio Perez is taking number 2 in the drivers' championship?
No, but this year almost. It's a pretty good spread between him
almost
and Hamilton.
Isn't yes.
But here's the thing. It's a 1-for-1 in terms of their progression of their careers. Sergio's definitely on the back half of his career, as is Alonso. And in terms of performance, neither one of those is going to usurp Max Verstappen, right? They're always going to be running second to Max. They're not going to let Alonso win over Max Verstappen. You know it. So why would Red Bull pay that expense and do that when they could just keep Sergio for basically the same thing? I think if Red Bull made a move, it would be to go for a younger academy type driver, get him in the Max Verstappen kind of system, have him train and watch and learn. And then whenever Max just decides to walk away because he has $500 million, they can put that guy into the seat.
Which we're not going to mention anything else about Max Verstappen in the rest of this video because it's not about him. But I do want to say he's the only person on the grid who has a contract all the way out to 2028. I mean, Jesus.
And worth every penny of it. But,
100%.
The next closest is actually Oscar Piastri, who goes through 2026. So there's a 2-year gap in driver contracts.
They're like, we're locking you down. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah, and it's an incredible amount of money. Let's move into the Ferraris. And with all of this, we want your feedback on how you see the driver market going. So again, take a look at some of the articles that are out there. We just Googled like 2024 driver contacts, and there was a couple of articles that came up that list out all the details pretty nice and neat for you. Take a look at those and then comment on this video, either where you want to see drivers go or where you want to see drivers stay. And we would love to get that kind of feedback. But let's move into the Ferraris. Both Ferraris have contracts ending in 2024. I'm going to say that Leclerc is a guarantee to get re-signed. In an ideal world, Carlos Sainz is also a guarantee to get re-signed. But sometimes you never know. Like Leclerc is their guy. Carlos is a little bit more expendable from a branding standpoint. They could reach for some either veteran driver like an Alonso or a young up-and-comer like somebody in F2 right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't say, like you said, I wouldn't say Carlos Sainz is a lock. It would be the smartest move probably for Ferrari just because he has come to grips with that car. He has shown to be the fast Ferrari when Charles Leclerc isn't adapted well to the car, or if there is any kind of mechanical problems, he can get the job done. He's the only driver on the grid that isn't driving a Red Bull that has won a race this year. Can't forget that. And he did it in that Scarlet Ferrari. So in terms of expendability, it's tough. I wouldn't say it's a 50-50 throw up in the air. I think it's probably more like a 70-30, 70% chance that he stays with Ferrari, but a 30% chance we could see him make a move.
My only question would be, where does he make a move to? Because when you're looking at Ferrari, Mercedes, and McLaren, all of those right now would be lateral moves, right? Really, your only step up on those teams is to go to Red Bull. Now, here's my scenario. Here's my Alonso scenario for you. I'd love to see Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz because I do think those two could compete for a championship.
I don't see Carlos Sainz going to Red Bull and the only reason why is because he was a part, if you remember, he was a part of that Red Bull Academy when he first came into the game. He was at the time, Toro Rosso, not AlphaTauri, but he was a Toro Rosso driver, gave that up when he made his move. So I don't typically when we see a driver leave the Red Bull program, they don't really come back to the Red Bull program. But to your point, McLaren, their contracts are locked up. Mercedes, their contracts are locked up. So the only move that he could do that would be a lateral, or in this case, an improvement, would be that Red Bull switch.
You know what they call that in business? A long-term investment. They said, you know what, Carlos, we've given you everything we can here at Toro Rosso. Go spread your wings somewhere else for a little bit, and we'll bring you back when the time is right. And the time is 2025.
Okay.
Jeremiah mentioned a little bit there. Jeremiah mentioned it a little bit there, but Mercedes and McLaren both have their drivers locked up. So Lewis Hamilton runs through 2025, as does George Russell. Honestly, I think that's a good deal for both Mercedes drivers, but you think Mercedes is regretting the long-term Russell deal yet?
It's tough because he went from Mr. Consistency to Mr. Explosivity. I mean, he's way more aggressive, and I understand your point in that you're trying to prove yourself. You're trying to prove yourself because your teammate's Lewis Hamilton, and you want to make sure that Mercedes knows that when Lewis steps down, they have their guy. But you're not going to do it DNFing, and you're not going to do it hitting somebody every other race. So
I think they would feel a lot more comfortable if his contract was up this next year because he had his really consistent year. This year he's having a really off year. What's next year going to be? If next year's another off year, you still have to sit with him for another year before you can make a move, or until you buy him out, I guess.
On top of that, all of the other drivers that you could replace him with are up right now. And if they get 2-year deals, then when George Russell's contract is up, they're not going to be available.
Yeah, and that takes us actually into the kind of the back half of this discussion, which is going to be the longer part, because as Jeremiah mentioned, we're going to get into the drivers now that are actually going to be looking to make some moves. These are the drivers on not quite the prime teams, not the top teams, either drivers that the teams could part ways with entirely, which we'll get into, or drivers that are looking to make a move up into a higher tier seat. let's start with Alpine, right? The middle of the road drivers for the middle of the road team.
The French drivers.
The French drivers. Both Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly expire after the 2024 season. I'll be really honest. I could see Alpine either re-signing both of them or doing a Haas situation and getting rid of both of them and replacing them.
I don't see them getting rid of Esteban Ocon. That's their poster guy. That's their man. That's their biggest marketer.
That is such a depressing poster guy.
It is 100%, but the team's also depressing. So, but I mean, like for example, Ryan Reynolds is now a major partner in the team. Esteban Ocon for this Las Vegas Grand Prix that's going to be coming up. If you're watching this after, then it already happened, but he will be wearing a Deadpool helmet. Ryan Reynolds played Deadpool. There's the connection there. That's his guy. I mean, there's a lot of respect there. Esteban Ocon is the main marketing tool at Alpine. Now, to your point, I can see that move being made with Pierre Gasly because, I mean, he's not a crazy, amazing, awesome super driver, but he's also not a bad driver. So it's tough because they could very easily just re-sign both drivers and try and run it back with a better car. And I could see that happening because Pierre Gasly, a race winner, mind you, at AlphaTauri, could get the job done, and Esteban Ocon has that aggression and always finishes in the top that he could also get the job done. But I'd say Esteban Ocon's seat is a lock for Alpine. I don't know about Pierre Gasly.
So many people have talked about this, but there's a lot of different ways to view it, and it's Pierre Gasly's overall career arc, right? Because as an F1 driver, it's pretty good to have a win. Like, not that many F1 drivers end up getting a win while they're in the sport. However, he did it at the Red Bull B team, and he went from Red Bull B team to primetime Red Bull, blew his shot, back to Red Bull B team, got his shot at what could be a top 4 constructor if the cards play out correctly, but Alpine has not hit the right, buttons the past couple of seasons. They're definitely not in that conversation like they used to be. Aston Martin certainly passed them up this year. McLaren is certainly ahead of them this year. So he's kind of just had that career where almost like a Fernando Alonso, where he's just made the moves at the wrong time, right? Going to Red Bull when he did, he just was not ready for the spotlight. And so immediately you set your career back at least a contract or two, because now you've got to prove yourself at the lower level again, right? So then he goes to Alpine, right when Alpine's in the fight for 4th place with McLaren. And then the second he and Esteban start driving for him, Alpine falls off a cliff, and now they're nothing again. So now you've got to sit through another contract or two before you can prove yourself. And at that point, it's the top teams have moved on to the younger guys. They moved on to the guys in their academy. They moved on to the guys that are winning F2. They're no longer looking at the 30-something-year-old guy that's bounced around teams and never really hit it right.
Yeah, it's definitely tough because, like you said, the Fernando Alonso move where he kind of went to the wrong team at the wrong time. It's tough because he was not that productive whatsoever at Red Bull, but then he goes to AlphaTauri and he does exactly what you said. To your credit, he actually does really good at AlphaTauri, and because of that, he's able to get that Alpine seat. And the reality of the situation is, if he had stayed at Red Bull, there's probably not a chance that he would have gotten that second Red Bull spot. Probably would have been filled with either a young driver, or in their case, they went to the Sergio Perez move with the defensive driver with a lot of experience who can get the job done consistently, which, that's kind of teetered out here at the end, but whatever, that's beside the point. I would say, as far as him proving himself, Alpine just has to bring a better car, because they were in the fight for 4th, but they didn't account for Aston Martin making the jump that they did, passing them up in the points because of the fact that they brought that better car. And McLaren reshaped their car, found some better form, found some bigger pace, and now they're fighting up at the top. So now, realistically, they're having to fight Red Bull, McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, and Aston Martin, which puts them 6th in the championship instead of fighting for that 3rd or 4th spot like they were back in the day. So that's tough. At the end of the day, Alpine just has to bring a better car, and I think we'll see more out of Pierre Gasly when that happens.
All right, let's go back in time a little bit. Do you remember the whole Alpine McLaren drama, signing Oscar Piastri, yada, yada? Now, the only reason that McLaren made a move away from Daniel Ricciardo was because they were signing Oscar Piastri, right?
Right.
Let's just say that they made the move away from Ricciardo. The Piastri thing didn't work out. Gasly would have been the one on the table to go to McLaren.
Out of the options that were left, he probably would have been the best pick, yeah.
Is Gasly now a top 8 driver if he's driving for McLaren? or
Yes,
he's still, 11th or wherever he is.
yes, but not in the way that, like, okay, so for example, you know how at the beginning of the season, Lando had this massive gap to Oscar Piastri. And as the season has progressed, Oscar has slowly started to close that gap. I don't know if we would have seen the same from Pierre Gasly. I think that Lando would have outshined him dramatically, maybe not to the Daniel Ricciardo effect where he's just absolutely demolishing him in every single race. But I don't think that he would have been closing the door like Oscar Piastri is and slowly getting up to that same pace.
All right, let's move into the Alfa Romeos. Valtteri Bottas is contracted through 2025, so he's a lock already. I've got some interesting thoughts on Zhou Guanyu.
Okay.
We have talked about how he really needs to be showing consistency, right? We saw last year him wreck out in DNF time after time again. He also was it this year when he started like top 5 and then blew it, like right off the jump he
Yeah.
bogged. We're not seeing that out of him. Isn't it Audi coming into
2026.
Sauber in 2026? So here's my thoughts on that. Do they keep the drivers consistent until that changeover happens? Or does whoever's running the team now try to quickly whip into place some kind of semblance of a good team and make some changes before Audi comes in and runs the show?
That's a tough call. I could definitely see them going with a driver swap just to make sure that they can kind of have a platform to jump from whenever Audi joins, because Audi, essentially what you would like to believe is that when Audi joins the team, they'll be able to bring a better car to the track and they'll be a lot faster and more competitive. And if that's the case, is their lineup Zhou Guanyu and Valtteri Bottas? Probably not. I mean, maybe, but there's got to be some change there. Now, the thing that's weird about this is I don't think the change is Zhou Guanyu. Just because he is the younger driver, he has started to progress as his years. He's getting more experience. He's getting better. His pace is going up. He's starting to get closer to Bottas, if not finishing ahead of him in some races. So to that respect, I think Zhou Guanyu stays at Alfa Romeo Sauber.
So what if they did this? So Bottas is up in 2025. Would it make the most sense to give Zhou a 1-year contract? Make them both up in 25 and prove it before the change?
Possibly, but I see him getting a 2026 contract, and I see Bottas staying at Alfa Romeo for one more year to kind of give Zhou Guanyu, here again, more experience, more data, more lessons that he can learn from the experienced driver, Valtteri Bottas. And then when Bottas's contract is up, that's when I see them making their move. But here again, I don't think it's Zhou Guanyu.
I want to stick with him for 1 minute and get into that conversation of what do we need to see. We brought this up, in a couple of different race recaps and previews when we're looking at what Zhou does on track. But what does he need to do in 2024 to keep an F1 seat? Because I think if he's not with Alfa Romeo, he's not with anybody. Or if he's not with Sauber, he's not with anybody. He's currently 18th in the driver standing with 6 points. I mean, honestly, you need to see him be in the top 15, I think.
You need to see him be in the top 15 every single race, but you also need to see him in the top 10 more often. I wouldn't say consistently every single race, which is why I made the point for top 15 every race, but he needs to be getting at least that 10th place spot, picking up that extra point. And I don't know, every 5th race, something like that. He'll probably end up with less points if he does that. So let me make a change there. Every 3rd race.
It's right now. I mean, it can't be much worse.
Well, he needs more points. It needs to be more competitive. Definitely, for sure, finishing in the top 15 almost every single race, but he needs to be getting more points.
Okay, this might be your favorite pairing to talk about, and I could be wrong on that, but Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel Ricciardo, both expiring after the 2024 season. Let's start with Danny Rick, because I think he's probably the more complex of the two. What do you see happening after 24? Is he getting re-signed? Is he going up? Is he going down? Is he
Red
in?
Bull.
Is he out? What's happening?
Red Bull.
Well, you put 4 people on Red Bull in the course of this conversation.
I have put 2, Fernando Alonso and Daniel Ricciardo. You said Carlos Sainz to Red Bull. That's realistically in terms of Red Bull, I see it either being Daniel Ricciardo, Sergio Perez, or Not Sergio Perez. I see it either being Daniel Ricciardo, Fernando Alonso, or Liam Lawson. And the only reason I say that is because Christian Horner has gone on record saying we have big plans for Liam Lawson. So to that respect, I see it being one of those three drivers. I don't see it being a McLaren driver. They're both locked down. McLaren has their guy with Lando Norris, and they've got this young up-and-comer who's really showing pace, and Oscar Piastri. They're not going to get rid of that duo. That's a dynamic duo. Just like Mercedes, they're going to hold on to that. So realistically, I see Liam Lawson, Fernando Alonso, and Daniel Ricciardo being the three options for Red Bull in that spot.
You bring up a good point that I probably wouldn't have thought of, which we've talked. I talked about like bringing in an F2 guy, which at this point, that it would be Liam Lawson, even though he's more of the reserve driver now. That's where
he's
he came
also
from.
Not an F2, but that's fine.
That's what I'm saying. He's more of the reserve driver now because
Right,
they've already pulled him up out of F2 to be in the F1 ranks. He had a really good showing in Daniel Ricciardo's absence.
Absolutely.
Really good. And I think the only thing that we don't want to happen with Liam Lawson. So let's say that Ricciardo does get, hypothetically, Ricciardo gets Red Bull seat. I don't want to see Liam Lawson fade into F1 oblivion like we've seen happen with so many other drivers that get either a one season shot or they get a 5-6 race, reserve shot at it. And then you just never see him again. I don't want that for Lawson because he had such a good showing in his 3 or 4 races.
Here's what I see, because this is a good segue to talk about the other AlphaTauri driver, Yuki Tsunoda. Here's what I realistically see happening. I could see Daniel Ricciardo getting the second Red Bull spot. Liam Lawson picks up that permanent AlphaTauri spot, and they get rid of Yuki Tsunoda and they bring in a new up-and-coming driver from F2.
And that almost hurts to say. So not to completely abandon the Daniel Ricciardo thing. There's so many things that could happen. We could speculate all day. He could either be moved up to a prime seat somewhere. He could stay at AlphaTauri, or he could not be re-signed and AlphaTauri goes with Liam Lawson and Yuki Tsunoda, right?
Right.
So with Yuki Tsunoda, he's right now 23 years old. He will turn 24 in the middle of next season. He's still so young, but the only problem is he's been better. Let me rephrase that. He's gotten worse every single year. He's like an NFL running back. You start at 5 yards a carry, then you go to 4, then you go to 3, then you go to 2 yards a carry. He's been doing that same thing. He went from 7th place to 13th place to 14th place to now he's in, again, back to 14th place with 13 points. Like, dude, you've been there for 3 or 4 seasons. You're an experienced, tenured F1 driver with more experience than most people that race in F1, and you're at 13 points.
My problem with Yuki Tsunoda is he has pace. He has great pace. We see it in almost every single race where he starts, they talk about the battle up at the front with the McLarens and Mercedes, and then they kind of dive back into the back to see what's happening in the background. And it's always Yuki Tsunoda making passes. Let's say he has a bad qualifying, starts in 17th. He's definitely moving up that grid. The problem with Yuki is that he's moving up until he hits something, or he hits someone, or the car problem, or something happens that takes him out of his position. And maybe he fights his way back up, but it's not going to be what it was when he was originally showing that pace in the beginning. And it's just happened too many times at this point. We see Yuki Tsunoda climbing the ranks. Oh, now he's in 10th. Oh, he's fighting for the 9th spot. Oh, he's fighting for the 8th spot. Bang, makes contact with Oscar Piastri. Now he's back down to 15th. It happens too often, and I'm getting tired of seeing it because I keep wanting to cheer for him because I'm like, oh, go Yuki, look at him go. And then something happens and he drops all the way back every time.
I would almost like to see AlphaTauri completely churn their roster after 24, whether that be Ricciardo goes somewhere else and then Yuki gets cut or whatever, but I don't think he's the future of Red Bull anymore. And that hurts because if you would have asked me at the beginning of this season, I still would have said, yeah, Yuki's the future of Red Bull. But what we're seeing this year is not consistency. And we've seen Daniel Ricciardo and Liam Lawson get decent pace out of the gate in that AlphaTauri car. Now, it's still not a good car. Don't get me wrong. It's not a top 4 car.
Right.
But it has the potential to be with the right drivers. And I think that's what we've seen from every good driver that's raced at AlphaTauri or Toro Rosso. They push the car beyond its limits and they do it well. They don't push it beyond the limits to where they're DNFing every race or to where the car breaks down or when they crash into somebody. They do it in a way to get consistent points to slowly climb the leaderboard, which, again, Yuki sitting in 14th at 13 points, it's not really cutting it. Okay, let's move into possibly the one that we would love to see get a big time shot more than any other driver. The Thai British driver himself, Alex Albon.
Yes.
The kid almost had a similar career arc to Pierre Gasly, and you could argue that Pierre Gasly's career is ahead of Alex Albon, with Pierre being at Alpine and Albon being at Williams. But we are seeing a lot more out of Alex Albon in the Williams than we're seeing out of Pierre Gasly in an Alpine.
To that point, something I didn't think of when we were talking about Pierre Gasly and their contracts being up, I could see them make the switch. I could see Alex Albon finally getting out of the Williams, finally getting out of the back, and going to Alpine to partner up with Esteban Ocon.
I could see him going to two places. So, one, Williams could re-sign him, and there's a chance that they do. But honestly, I think a top team needs to take a shot at Alex Albon. It's not going to be Red Bull. Sorry, he's not going back. That's his one Pierre Gasly caveat. They both had a shot at Red Bull. I don't think they're going back.
Are you about to say what I think you're going to say?
Well, no, he's not going to Ferrari either.
Okay.
I think he could be Fernando Alonso's replacement at Aston Martin. I could see an Albon Stroll lineup. Or, like you were hinting at there, I could see him going to the Alpine squad.
I really thought you were about to say we could see a Charles Leclerc, Alex Albon team up at Ferrari.
There's a chance, and a lot of this is weird because you can't have 8 big moves, right? Like you can only have like 1 or 2 big moves after next season, because the Ferrari seats, if they both re-sign, then those are locked away and that removes that. Then you just have Perez's seat. And if he gets re-signed, well, then all of your big moves are gone except for Fernando Alonso's seat. But Alonso's not going to drop back to Williams or Alfa Romeo. So then you're kind of stuck. So if it's seeing how the dominoes fall. If one domino falls, then it's likely more are going to fall. If one locks in, it's likely the rest are going to lock in because there's nowhere else for them to move around.
Right.
And so when you look at Alex Albon, again, I don't think Red Bull's going to go for him. Could be completely wrong, but I don't think they are. Ferrari, I guess if Carlos Sainz got a better seat somewhere else, or they just refuse to re-sign Carlos Sainz, but I don't see you trading Carlos Sainz for Alex Albon. That's not a great trade, at least not now. I think the most realistic option would be the Alpines or the Aston Martin seat. And again, I think Alpine would be a really good fit, seeing him and Ocon race.
Yeah, and then another thing that we have to talk about that we're not mentioning is a certain Felipe Drugovich and Teo Pourchaire. These guys are savages down in F2, and they're itching, man. They're waiting for their spot. And you know what? Rightfully so. I mean, they're both amazing drivers. And it's tough because we have all these different seats that are starting to open up, and we might even see a move this year with Logan Sargent's contract coming up, and, you know, maybe one of those drivers replaces him. We don't know. Maybe he gets re-signed, stays at Williams. But we got to talk about those two drivers too, because they're hot commodities in F2 and they need a seat.
So you know what is going to be really telling is going to be next season, 2024, who the reserve and test drivers are, because those are always, we look at F2 and like, okay, Logan Sargent, right? His contract's up this year. He was probably brought up too early from Formula 2.
Fourth in the championship.
He finished fourth. He wasn't winning. He didn't, correct me if I'm wrong, he didn't spend time as a reserve or test driver for F1 for a full season. They had to like force his super license privileges. Seeing his results this year kind of backed that up, that he just wasn't really ready for this. So I think we look at next year, who are the reserve and test drivers? Do they pull Drugovich and Pourchaire up to the reserve test driver role and they're not in F2? That's a really big sign. That's what Liam Lawson did. That's what Nick DeVries did. They were purely reserve and test drivers, meaning they're only focused on Formula One.
Yeah, I understand that. Well, first of all, Liam Lawson's a reserve driver, but he's also racing in a completely different race series. And that's what a lot of these reserve and test drivers will do. So that they don't just take a year off. They will go and race in another series, whether it's another year at F2 or, you know, Formula, whatever, Formula Asian series, Euro series, all the different ones that they have. But my problem with the test driver, reserve driver role is Nick DeVries was stuck in that role for years. So it doesn't really mean much, man. I mean, you want to say that it means much because, oh, now you're tacked onto an F1 team. Now you're going to really start making your mark. Not really. Not really.
Oscar Piastri, Liam Lawson, Nick DeVries, they were all in that spot. I think it's a really good place to look.
I think they need to keep racing if they even do get it. Yeah, I mean, for sure. If they get it, they're on the right track, 100%. I'm not going to disagree with you there. But that's not what I really want to see from them. I want to see them get a contract, move up. Let's see some things happen.
Okay, let's do our last two. The Haas team.
Yep.
I'll be, you kick this off. This is your team.
It's tough because I always thought that Kevin Magnussen was a really fast dude with a lot of pace, a lot of aggression and all that. But Nico Hulkenberg is blowing him out of the water this year. And to that respect, I mean, I could see them holding on to Nico Hulkenberg just for the experience aspect, but maybe they go for another, a rookie driver to see, kind of shake things up, learn under Nico. And of course, they could also just re-sign Kevin Magnussen and keep the same driver's lineup. But I could see, the Teo Pourchaire, like we talked about, Felipe Drugovich, like we talked about, possibly going to the Haas team, partnering up with Nico Hulkenberg, and Nico kind of shows them the ropes.
Replace both of them.
Ew. Blech. Your hate for Nico is disgusting.
They're both. It's not. Look, personally, like I like their personalities. I like what they brought to the team.
We're talking driver ability.
They brought some structure to Haas that has been just stumbling over itself for 6 years now. Replace them both. Get 2 young up-and-comers. Build a team. Build a program. Like, so let's stop this consistency thing. Let's get guys out there that are willing to take risks, and they also have time to develop their skills, not guys that have already developed as many skills as they're going to have.
You can't get rid of both of them, and I'll tell you why. They already did this experiment with Nikita Mazepin and
those were 2 horrible driver choices.
They didn't know because Mick Schumacher was very promising in F2, who showed a lot of potential. He was really good. So you have no idea what kind of package you're getting. You need experience on the team. You cannot have 2 young drivers when neither one of your drivers knows what they're doing. That doesn't make any sense at all.
I get what you're saying. You need at least one of them for consistency. You bring in a young driver to do it. That might be the more business accurate F1 approach to rebuilding a team. Maybe you're right, but I think that these 2 guys are also not the guys that I would want bringing up my new driver because they really don't have a successful track history in F1. They've been middle of the road drivers at best.
No, Nico Hulkenberg was a top driver who lost his seat and then couldn't find another seat, and therefore he just kind of stayed in this limbo state. But he was finishing in very high positions on the team that he was at when he was racing.
Do you know what top drivers get? Better racing seats. They don't find themselves in no man's land for 3 years.
Look, man, do your research. Figure things out. You got to up your knowledge level.
Okay. Let us know in the comments how you want to see the Haas team play out. Do you want to see the return of Nico Hulkenberg or Kevin Magnussen? Or do you want to see an entirely new Haas team?
Guys, if you think Mick Schumacher finally gets a spot because he is waiting in the wings, he gets that number 2 Ferrari seat, partners with Charles Leclerc, and they dominate for years to come, I think I agree with you.
All right, guys. We'll see you.
Bye, guys.